There is a growing terror in modern life that rarely makes headlines. Not the terror of war or famine, but the quieter fear of becoming disposable, forgotten, cancelled, misunderstood, left behind. So many people today carry invisible griefs, friendships that faded without explanation, families fractured by ideology, conversations poisoned by suspicion, communities where outrage speaks louder than compassion. Two recent articles, one from an Indian journalist called "The Quiet Grief of Adult Friendship" and another from the USA titled "Friend Shift," describe how adulthood often transforms friendship from covenant into convenience. The authors point to one of the painful realities of modern life, namely that many friendships no longer endure difficulty very well. People move, careers change, pressures grow, and little by little, friendships disappear without anyone intending harm. What remains for many adults is a quiet loneliness, the sense that they are known by many people, but deeply accompanied by very few. Into that anxious human landscape comes a startling biblical truth. Fear can destroy the soul long before it harms the body. Jeremiah knows that fear intimately. "I hear so many disparaging me, terror from every side." Friends whisper against him and wait for him to stumble. Yet the key message of Jeremiah's witness is this: God remains with the vulnerable person even when society turns hostile and relationships fracture. Jeremiah refuses bitterness because he trusts that God stands with the wounded and rescues the poor from the power of the wicked. Paul, in Romans, names the deeper wound beneath human division. The key message of his letter is this: sin and death spread through humanity, but grace spreads further and deeper through Christ. Human beings hurt one another. Pride, fear, and rivalry poison relationships and societies alike. Yet grace is greater than transgression. God does not abandon humanity to the cycles of violence and estrangement. This is where Jesus' disturbing words about Gehenna become profoundly important. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Fear rather the one who can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. Bradley Jersak, in Her Gates Will Never Be Shut, Hope, Hell, and the New Jerusalem, explains what he calls the Gehenna tradition. Gehenna was the valley outside Jerusalem associated with burning refuse, violence, and even the ancient sacrifice of children. Jesus uses it not so much as a threat about the afterlife, but as an image of what happens when human beings surrender themselves to hatred, fear, and dehumanization. Gehenna is what society becomes when we consume one another emotionally, spiritually, and socially. It is a sobering thought that many people today may already be living closer to that reality than we imagine. Friendships destroyed by ideological contempt, families unable to speak to one another, young people humiliated online, elderly people abandoned in silence, souls worn down by constant outrage and endless comparison. Matthew's Gospel this weekend declares that disciples must live courageously in trust because God's loving attention extends even to sparrows and every hair on their heads. In 2026, Matthew's Gospel speaks directly into a culture where many people quietly feel discarded, forgotten, or without value. Against that reality, Christ insists on the radical dignity of every person. Not one sparrow falls to the ground without your Father knowing. The theologian Rowan Williams once observed that hell begins wherever communion between persons collapses. The secular commentator David Brooks similarly argues that modern society suffers from an epidemic of loneliness, but because people crave not merely success, but belonging. Both insights illuminate today's gospel message, that the soul withers where love disappears. It is for this reason that Jesus calls on us to not merely avoid wrongdoing, but to resist the ways people become hardened towards one another through indifference, resentment, exclusion, and contempt. He calls us to remain faithful in difficult relationships and to defend the dignity of those who are forgotten. The deepest truth in the gospel is not terror, but tenderness. The God who notices the sparrow has never stopped noticing us. And perhaps salvation begins there, when human beings learn again how to remain present to one another before the loneliness and indifference that lie at the heart of Gehenna consume the soul. Amen.